And now in South Africa, the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, commonly called NUMSA, has signed a 7% increase in wages for workers in the engineering sector above inflation. The union participated in wage talks as the largest union representing the majority of workers in the metals engineering industry's bargaining council, MIBFA. NUMSA has also agreed to ring-fence funding for workers. Beg your pardon. NUMSA has also agreed to ring-fence funding for workers to access housing, a historic commitment in the engineering sector. The 3-year wage agreement is valid from July 2024 to June 2027, with increases based on minimum pay rates. The agreement requires a partnership with stakeholders. And joining me for more on this is Phakamile Majola. She is NUMSA national spokesperson. Thank you, Phakamile, for joining me today.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Well, good afternoon to you over there. Now, how does NUMSA view the recently signed wage agreement in the engineering sector?
NUMSA welcomes this agreement. We think that it is a breakthrough agreement on two fronts. First of all, the economic outlook in South Africa is not that good at the moment. It's very difficult to secure a wage deal where you are able to get workers to get above inflation. Inflation in South Africa at the moment is at 5.3%. So NUMSA's deal is one where it's a 3-year agreement. For the first year of the agreement, workers will get a 7% increase, which is definitely above the current interest rate. And for the second and the third year of the deal, they will get 6%. One of the other things about this deal that we feel makes it historic is the fact that all parties have committed to creating a mechanism for workers to be able to access affordable housing. And this is quite an important achievement for us as a trade union, particularly because the majority of the members that we represent are people who we call part of the missing middle. And what that means is that in South Africa, they can only afford, they don't qualify for the free housing that government gives to the poor, but they also don't earn enough to get traditional loans through the banking system. So the fact that we have come to this type of agreement with employers is for us a very, very positive step indeed.
But I'd like you to talk to us about the rationale behind, the wage increases of 7%, 6%, and then 6%, over a period of 3 years. And then why are the increases sort of based on minimum rates of pay? I'd like you to sort of address this before we then move on to the housing and other issues.
Sure. Part of the negotiations is that, when you come together in negotiations, parties will make proposals and compromises, of course, will be made. We realized early on that we needed to sign a multi-year deal. In fact, traditionally, we have frequently signed multi-year deals in engineering and in other big sectors where we're organized. And the reason we do that is primarily for labor stability. So in this instance, it is a 3-year deal, which kicks off on the 1st of July, 2024, and then it expires on the 30th of June, 2027. And then in terms of the increase based on the minimum rate versus the actual rate, this was one of the compromises that we had to make in the negotiations. When we started in our wage talks as NUMSA, we were demanding an increase based on the actual rates of pay and not on the minimum rate. And if I can just explain the difference for the sake of your viewers, the minimum rate is based on whatever is the rate that a worker would earn. So let me give an example. In engineering, you've got various grades, and the lowest grade is grade H, and at grade H, the least you can earn is 59 Rand 10 cents. But there are workers who are earning a little bit more than that, even though they're in that grade. And that's because, previous wage agreements would have probably boosted their income. So we're saying what has been signed is an agreement where your increase is based on the rate where you are, which is the minimum rate. It's not based on what you are actually earning. So that was a compromise that we had to make.
Okay.
Even though as a union, we actually did want it to be on the actual rates of pay, we had to accept that because employers were not going to agree to any agreement where it was going for rates of pay. And so we had to forego that as a demand.
All right, well, some have actually opined that this deal potentially sets a precedent for future labor agreements and, beg your pardon, raises operational costs for the embattled sector. Don't you think the rise in operational costs is something to be worried about, knowing that this could be passed on to consumers at the end of the day, or somebody anyway along the line would definitely have to pay for it?
Well, I think these are the considerations that employers make when they embark on wage negotiations. And as I said, we were able to compromise. NUMSA traditionally demands double-digit increases. We demanded 7%, 6%, and 6% because we are very mindful of the economic pressures that the companies in engineering are going through. We know that there's a lot of pressure that particularly smaller firms are experiencing. But at the same time, workers in this country have suffered a lot. Workers in South Africa who support the engineering sector and have carried it on their backs have not received any sort of reprieve for their stress and the strains that they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis because of the cost of living. So it really is about parties finding each other. That is what negotiations are about. The unions were forced to compromise on the demand for an increase that was based on the actual rates of pay in order to accommodate the stresses and the strains of the industry. The industry must compromise and give workers above inflation increases. So this is what negotiation is about. And a good union will think about a deal which is sustainable in the long term, but also a deal which will benefit workers. We feel that we've walked that middle line very well. We don't want to secure an agreement that's going to result in job losses down the line. And we believe that the way this deal has been structured, most, if not all companies should be comfortable with paying this increase.
All right, so for you, you don't think there is anything to be worried about operational cost, sort of feeding down the line into some other purses?
No, there isn't. We are not the employer. We're a union. And our primary concern are the demands of workers. The CEOs who get paid millions a month are the ones who think about operational costs. And if you consider the fact that we were able to find each other with those CEOs and agree that what we have settled on is fair, I certainly think that companies will be able to afford it. But also in the agreements of, particularly within engineering, there is a clause that allows companies that are struggling financially to apply for exemption for wage increases. So that avenue is available to company owners. So I think we have been very, very reasonable as a union, particularly because we were able to negotiate this within 3 rounds, and we did not have to resort to a national strike action, which by far, I think we can both agree, would have been far, far worse for the industry.
All right, from the press release and of course from our conversation, this deal included not just a pay raise, but also a commitment to sort of address housing challenges faced by engineering professionals. I'd like you to talk to us about, how this is expected to work.
So what we said in the deal and what was confirmed in the deal is that from the day of signing, and of course parties signed, in fact there'll be another formal signing ceremony on Wednesday, the 15th of May, where we expect that all employer associations in the engineering sector and all other unions will sign. What we are basically saying is that from 3 months of signing that deal, an institutional framework has to be defined and a model must be developed for workers to be able to access affordable housing and to access funding for affordable housing. As I speak to you, conversations have already begun with the pension fund in the engineering sector, MIBFA, around this issue to ensure that we do meet the 3-month deadline that has been stipulated in the wage agreement. And we're doing this precisely because workers have made it very clear that they don't just want some sort of commitment on paper, which looks good, but doesn't translate to anything meaningful down the line.
Okay, Phakamile, just before we go, because we're pressed for time, I want to say that specifically the Board of Trustees of the funds, that's MIBFA, is expected to come up with a framework which will address eligibility criteria, legal requirements, funding models, and subsidy mechanisms. In 30 seconds, I would like you to talk to us about, what your expectations are in this regard, and then how do you want to also ensure that all stakeholders are carried along, and also to avoid rancor or displeasure from any quarter?
Our expectations are that within 3 months, this funding mechanism will be up and running and workers will be able to access affordable housing. The fund, as we understand it, we think it might actually be able to cater for the demands that we have laid down, but we need to ensure that the process is done in an orderly manner. And all of the parties who are involved in the talks are also going to be engaged in this process. So we remain hopeful that within 3 months, workers will be able to access housing, affordable housing.
All right, Phakamile Majola, thank you for your time on the show and for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.